Hello and a warm welcome to today's webinar, e-commerce performance in 2022 and the forecast for 2023. You know, the last 2 years have been a real roller coaster for the e-commerce industry. We saw how the pandemic and lockdown sent the first shockwaves through the industry, and now we're dealing with the second shockwave with the cost of living crisis and threat of an economic recession. So we've enjoyed the boom, but the question now is, how do we avoid the bust? And that's why I'm really pleased to have our guest speakers here today to hopefully answer some of those questions and give us some clarity. Let me hand over. First, can I ask you to present yourselves? Andy, you first.
Yes, hello everybody. Nice to be here. So I'm Andy Mulcahy from IMRG. We're a trade body for online retail in the UK. So what we do is we take sales figures in from lots and lots of retailers, and then we provide benchmarking to show how things are going in various categories, and we can cut the data in all sorts of ways. We also track lots of performance stuff across websites, so things like checkout abandonment rates and click-throughs and things like that. And I've got some of the market stuff to show you today, and also just a little bit of that study stuff around conversion and delivery to show you as well. So hopefully, amidst all the gloom, maybe there's something in there that might help you.
Of course. Thank you, Andy. And Jim, over to you.
Hi, yeah, I'm Jim Higginson. I've spent 27 years in supply chain and logistical operations in various brands around the world. And I focus on B2B and B2C. But in the last 10 years, most of my time has been taken up with the operations around B2C, sustainability and the last mile. And I have decided now to set up my own consultancy to focus on sustainability, efficiency within operations. And I'm really pleased to be here.
Fantastic. And that's why I'm really excited to have you both here, because we've got the detailed analysis and the data insights from IMRG around performance and revenue. And then we've got the real life, hands-on operational experience and looking at it vitally from final mile and delivery, which we're going to get from you, Jim. And as you can see, I'm Bobby Toulis. I am flying the GFS flag today. If you don't know who we are, then GFS are the e-commerce industry's first, and now we're the largest provider of multi-carrier delivery services and technology. So delivery is what we do and what we love the most. So let's have a look at what we'll be covering. Andy, we're going to be starting with you, and where you'll be sharing all the IMRG insights and analysis around 2022. And then you're also going to be sharing with us what IMRG see as the forecast for 2023. And then I'm going to be switching over to Jim and exploring the angle around what this means for delivery and final mile. And then we come to the big finale question, where I'll bring you both together and ask, what is it going to take for online retailers to succeed in 2023? So lots to cover. Andy, I'm going to hand over to you.
Excellent. Right. So I'm going to give you a bit of a view of the market. Then there's some quite complicated stuff in here, but I'll try and explain it to you. So I'm jumping around a little bit, but there is a thread of narrative. So I'm going to show you month on month and some year on year stuff first. We'll have a little look at Black Friday and how that went, and then some of the key performance indicators like spend at the checkout and conversion rates, and finally getting into delivery and returns as well, because it's quite a prominent thing of e-commerce. Just to absolutely clarify, all the stuff that I'm showing here is specific to online sales. So it is retailers that just sell online, but it's also multi-channel retailers, and we just get their online sales. There's no high street stuff in here. So the likes of John Lewis and Marks and Spencer's and New Look and Argos and River Island, etc. It's their online sales that we track. So the first
just on that, what you guys do is really unique. How many retailers are you tracking? How many retailers are giving you all this data that is presented here?
There's about 200. It's a bit more than that now, actually. And the sample that we took in 2022 was about 24 billion online, I think. So it's a very good, very strong sample. It's about a third large retailers, a third mid-size, and a third small as well.
Perfect.
The first one is, this is probably the most complicated slides. Let's get this one out of the way nice and quick. So this is month-on-month growth. And what that means is if you take December, for example, did the amount of money spent in December online go up or down compared to November? So what you're looking at here is 4 years of data. 2019 is blue, orange is 2020, grey is 2021, and yellow is 2022. Now, what you would normally get if you didn't have pandemics and cost of living crisis is these lines would run pretty parallel, really. So you get a little bit of movement where Easter moves around between April and May normally, but you don't get these gigantic gaps like we got in April when we went into the first lockdown and everything. So what happened in e-commerce is that lockdown came in, loads and loads of volume went online because the shops were closed effectively. And then you know what happened after that. We were sort of in and out, and you know, all that palaver over a couple of years, really. And that's why those lines got really pulled around. But if you look at sort of August through to October, those lines are absolutely parallel. So the interesting thing is, by the time you get to that time of the year, it seems like where you are is where you are moving into that. So you get a big spike into November with Black Friday and everything, and now you actually get a decline in sales into December. That never used to be the case. Black Friday has changed the game a little bit there. So are these lines any good? Well, the thing to look at really is January. So you see that yellow line, which is our 2022 line, big gap between where it normally is. So you get a drop away between December and January because it's not Christmas anymore. But this year it was quite a pronounced one. But that is against 2021 January, when we went into that lockdown, and you know, the stores were closed, a lot of volume goes online. So what you're tracking really is we had this big boom, and then it's kind of fallen away. If you look at 2019, we are still up against that. There has actually been growth, but it's a very difficult situation we find ourselves in the minute, which I'm going to talk you through a little bit more in a second. Now, if we look at year on year for this, so we're switching categories here. So what you're going to see now is revenue split out by a bunch of categories, and you're looking at year on year here instead. Okay, so this is 2022 as a whole. And the total market is about 7 along from the right hand side there, and it was down 10% for the year. And I'm going to put that into perspective in just a second. But look at all those categories, right? Some of them spectacular declines there. Gardening's a slight anomaly there. Garden was up at times 300 to 400% during the pandemic online. So you know, there is a little bit of give to be had there. But some of the other ones have been having a bit of a shocker. So electricals and home, for example, you know, big growth. They were up about 100% or so in 2020, and now they're kind of down 15% or so for the year. So still up from where they were, but declining, and everyone's a little bit nervous about it, frankly. The only one that did well was clothing, and a few of its subcategories. Women's wear was sort of held up reasonably well across the year. But the thing with clothing is it had a different experience to the rest of the categories in that it sort of missed the 2020 ferry, didn't quite get on board, and consequently it's not coming from the same position. So there's that. So basically not very good, very difficult situation. No one's too sure where it's going to settle down. But this is actually in spite of the fact that we had a good Black Friday. So what we're going to show you now is just a few things about Black Friday. I'm not going to go into massive detail. We have got a hell of a lot of detail, but this is just to give you a view of what happened, right? So the first thing is 2021. That was the growth across Black Friday week. So we look at it as an 8-day week, Monday through to Cyber Monday, and declines right across the week. But that was against the period in 2020 when out of lockdown, which was the biggest thing that's ever happened in e-commerce, and will probably never be that big ever again because there was a lockdown. So you know, you get these declines, and it's a reasonably reliable pattern. So if the line before that, year before, basically echoed that, but was up instead. What happened in 2022? Lots of things were going on. Lots of people saying, well, what's the World Cup going to do and all this sort of thing. Completely scattergun performance, really. So you don't normally see the lines sort of jumping around like that. If they're up, they're up. If they're down, they're down. You know, the demand is kind of good or bad. And this is what happened. So some big declines and some sort of big jumps as well. So it's kind of all over the place. But to give you the cumulative figure for that, you know, so it sort of looks all right, doesn't it? But it's a bit up and down. And actually, for the 8-day period that we're looking at there, it was just about positive. It was up 0.3%. In the context of the year that we've just had, that's actually not that bad. I know it doesn't sound great, but it's not bad. So that's that. And then what's happened sort of since then is what we'll get onto now. So as I said, it was 0.3% up, so kind of flat, but not bad. And that was against -10 from last year. And then if we look at the weeks that followed Black Friday, if you remember, we've had all the Royal Mail strikes and all this sort of stuff. So there's been a hell of a lot of problems. And you can see the sort of impact here, right? So what you're looking at here is year-on-year revenue for 2 years. So 2021 is blue, and the orange one is 2022. So while the orange line, if you remember, how tough growth was, sort of hugging around the 5 to 10% mark doesn't feel like it's that bad. But if you look at the week following Black Friday week, so Black Friday week was better than we thought. We thought it would be a decline in it, and it wasn't. But look at the week following it; it couldn't grow against -34% from last year. So that tells you that was weak demand in that week. And then 11th of December that week, actually pretty good, right? -5 against -5 in the context of the year is all right. So I think people were sort of getting their stuff done there, because they certainly didn't on the 18th of December when we got a bit close to Christmas. I think people panicked a little bit. If you look at multi-channel retail performance against online only, incidentally, the online only ones did bad. The multi-channel ones did pretty well. So I think click and collect probably came into people's minds a bit more there. Now, I'm just going to get you into 2022 in a little bit more focus now. So I'm just going to give you a little bit of a review and show you some of the key performance stuff. So the first thing is to show you this by split out by year. So this is quite a long view you have here. So back to 2010, and this is year-on-year growth for each of those years in online sales. And 2020 is the big sore thumb there, just enormous growth on. Look at where the lines were going. They were sort of coming down a bit. So it wasn't all roses, actually, before this stuff happened. There are problems online. And then 2020, obviously, was complete anomaly. And 2022 is the first time it's ever been negative, and it was quite strongly negative. So, it does look pretty bad on that measure. I could talk about this slide for quite a long time, but we don't really have the time to do it now. Why did each of those bars do that? I can't answer that. But let's go into some of the reasons behind this. So this is the basket value. So this is the average spend. So what you're looking at there is 12 months, and the blue bar is 2021 and the orange bar is 2022, right, to give you a comparison by month. So it goes up and down a little bit across the year. It normally does that. But look at the gaps in some of them, right? So the orange one is quite a lot higher at times. And when you get to sort of July, August time, yes, they do sort of flatten out a little bit. But that's because we saw the increases in the spikes in average basket value start to go up in 2021 when we had all the supply chain problems. And then, of course, you get into 2022 and the big spikes in inflation and everything. Those gaps on the left-hand side is basically what's happened. So really what you read from it is that the average spend at the checkout is somewhere near about £20 higher than it was in the previous year. Okay, so if in case you're wondering why spend is not going fantastic online, it's because things are a lot more expensive. Kind of illustrates that quite well. Now, what happens when you do that? If we look at the checkout, the conversion for the overall site, same kind of deal here. So you've got the 12 months of the year, and you've got blue 2021, orange 2022, and some of those drops are just really profound. Some of them are 20 to 25% decline, right? So people are still going to websites. The positive thing, by the way, from 2022 is that even though we had huge growth in traffic to websites because of pandemic, there was actually still a little bit of growth in traffic to websites in 2022. It was a little bit scattergun, but at times it was up. So people are still going to websites. They're just not converting at the same rate that they were, which is really where your problem is. But if you want to be positive about it, you could say, if we're able to sort of overcome the economic problems that we've got, and people get a little bit more confident in their spending, then online actually should start to go up again. But at the moment, it's not a fantastic view really. So what can you do about conversion? You can try and optimize certain areas of your site, and this is what e-commerce teams spend all their time doing. Effectively, is trying to work out what can we do to make little incremental changes. And this is something that we're kind of quite interested in at IMRG. So what we do is we do these studies where we get groups of retailers and we get specific metrics from them just to do a dedicated bit of work. And what we did here was we got from them the progression rates at every stage of the checkout. So if you imagine, you go to the checkout, you put your details in, and then you say next stage, and then you go and it says put your delivery option in, next stage. And we got the completion rate where people press those buttons. What you're looking at here is the delivery option page. And in the sample of retailers we had, there were 20 who had that page, right? People structure their checkouts in different ways. Only 20 of them actually had this page. And what we've done here is each of those little heads along the top is a retailer, and they're lined up from right to left in order of the checkout completion. And just to put it to say that the sort of differences in this, on the left-hand side, you've got a few that are 99%, right? So for the traffic that make it to that page, 99% get through. And along to the bottom there's some that are about 50%. So they lose half of their traffic at that point. So there's not a great deal you can do on the delivery options page, but then we look at how have they structured it and what do they offer. And what you're looking at here is the number of options that were available for each of those. So was there standard delivery and click and collect, or premium delivery, or something like that? And that's what that number tells you. And there's a line in the middle. But basically what it's showing to you is that on the right-hand side, there's far more retailers with a low number of delivery options. And on the left side, there's quite a few that have got a lot more options. Now, why is it that, you know, the left-hand side is 2 and the far right-hand side is 2 as well? Think that there might not have been a free delivery option there, so you kind of have to pay for it. So that's quite possibly one of the reasons there. But that's just one thing that you can look at to see, you know, maybe we should bring in more options here.
And Andy, just on that point, if you remember, not too long ago, we sponsored the annual home delivery survey that IMRG have been running now for the last 10 years. And one thing that comes out of that consistently, you know, and that goes out to 2,000 UK households, that delivery options, or the lack of delivery options, was the second highest reason for cart abandonment, right? Apart from price. So after price, what consumers are looking for is the delivery options. And if they don't see enough choice or enough convenience of delivery options, that is the second highest reason why they would abandon their purchase at that point. So definitely, especially where we, from our perspective, offering the widest breadth of delivery options and convenience to consumers at your checkout is going to influence your cart abandonment rates.
It's interesting, is it, Bobby, because you know, Andy and I haven't spoken before this, but if I look at one of my things that I think brands need to focus on for 2023, it's on delivery options.
Yeah.
Because I think if you think about the whole purpose of B2C being about convenience, giving the consumer convenience in a time where there's a lot more competition online is absolutely now fundamental. It was a nice to have in previous years. For 2023, I think it's going to be absolutely fundamental.
I couldn't agree with you more. And I think that the industry has focused a lot on trying to improve delivery options and the delivery experience, because we all know that delivery experience is really fundamental to whether you not only get the sale in the first place, but actually they come back and buy from you again. But there is certainly now the time to offer put that same investment and focus on the returns experience as well. You know, consumers expect the same convenience and consistency from returns as they now do from delivery, for sure.
Speaking of which, returns is something that I wanted to just flag up here as well. So what I've picked out here is a rate from 2022, because it was the biggest sort of jump that we saw in the rate of return. So this is saying for Q2 in 2022, what was the rate of return that you got? And it was 20% for the sample that we had. It's obviously skewed towards fashion retailers. You know, things like health and beauty, they see a very low return rate. But it's a big spike on the same period from last year. So 16 to 20% is a big increase. And what a lot of retailers are saying is, they're seeing a bit more stuff come back, but also it's coming back a bit quicker. And people are sort of a bit more itchy about getting their refund. So it's a real problem for people.
Jim, do you agree with that? The returns rates in health and beauty, obviously with your background with Molton Brown and Huda.
Yeah.
What's your view?
It's funny actually, because beauty has quite low return rates generally, and that comes down to the terms and conditions, and it also comes down to the fact that online most people have actually gone out and tried it first, and so are buying either repeat purchase or they're buying their favorites. So their return rates are fairly low. However, I think returns, it's a double-edged sword, because in one respect, from a brand, you're trying to encourage people to buy from your site, so you want them to buy, but and you want to make the returns process as easy as possible. But on the other side of things, every return that goes through is a negative sale, and those negative sales generally hit you in January. Yeah. So your credits going through. So while you want the sale and you want people to buy, you will also want to make sure that that the consumer gets it right in the first place, and your return is not growing. So this is for a lot of other industries. I think this is quite a serious problem.
It's massive. I don't know whether you guys have seen the latest research from NAVA. I think it was earlier last year. They published a report that said that the cost of returns to the e-commerce industry was around $778 billion in merchandise that is returned every year. Certainly, that's got to be an area of priority where retailers need to be trying to bring that cost down, especially in the current context. Yeah.
And we'll touch on it a bit later as well in terms of just ways to look at minimising that.
Perfect.
So forecast time for you. This look away now, really. So 2023. First of all, let me show you 2022, what we thought would happen, and what actually happened. So for 2022, what we said was this: we do a sort of three-pronged forecast. So we don't say it's going to be 7% or whatever. We say we didn't used to do this. This is a pandemic thing. If it goes expected, then that will be the rate. If it goes quite well, then this will be the rate, and then if it goes quite badly, then this will be the rate instead. So in 2022, what we were saying is 7% down would be what we thought, but if it was pretty good, it might get to about -4, and if it was pretty bad, it would be -10. Guess what? It was -10. So it was the toe end of what we thought. But to try and smooth this a little bit, we can show you the growth across the year, right? So what you're seeing here is a bunch of categories and their performance across the year. So the black line is total market, and then the other ones are a bunch of categories, and that's across January to December for 2022. So clothing is your anomaly there. Like I say, it had a strange 2020, and then it's actually saw a bit of growth recently. So clothing very different to the other categories. Though to be honest, it has fallen away a little bit just in the last couple of months. But 2022, if you look at the first half of it, so if we put a little red box around the second half of the year there, you can see that things are actually quite different. So the first half of the year is a sort of lockdown comparison, very big declines, sometimes 30-35% kind of thing. But then as you get further into the year, it's actually sort of got a little bit better, because we sort of got rid of those lockdown affected year on years, and good riddance to them, because it does make analysis quite difficult. So what we do then is we're trying to work out what's going to happen this year. So this next slide is quite complicated, but I'll just explain to you. So the first bars that you see, right? So this is total market, and then a bunch of categories that you can see there. This is the performance for them year on year of 2022 against 2021. So for the whole year, okay. So some quite big declines, like home and garden electricals are down 18%. But then if we look at, if we bring in a second bar, it will show you just the last 6 months, right? So the last 6 months of 2022 against the last 6 months of 2021 year on year. And you can see that quite a lot of them have actually improved quite a bit, right? So when you knock out those lockdown affected measures, you get, it's not good, but it is still like a little bit better than it was. So that's kind of what's guided us a little bit. And I know you're thinking, oh, great, it's going to be positive then. But let's show you what we think instead. So this next graph is going to show you, first of all, the performance in 2022, which is this blue line here. So that's showing you what actually happened across that year. And then you've got expected, so what we think in 2023 was the yellow line here, what we think might happen. And then you've got two more lines, which is good and poor. So green is good, poor is red. And that's what will happen if things go a bit better than expected or a bit worse. So note that the gap, by the way, between good and bad is not symmetrical, right? So if it's bad, it's kind of bad. But even so, even good doesn't get you positive for the whole year, I'm afraid. And by the way, at the moment, looks like January is going to come in somewhere between sort of good and expected, I think. So, you never know. So that's that, but we can give you the total figures now. I'll bring these up. So this is our forecast for it. So we think that about -3 is expected, but, could get close to positive, possibly. And then we could just give you a few more here as well to give you some of the categories that we're tracking. So you can see clothing, home and garden, electricals, health and beauty, and gifts. So mostly negative, except for clothing, which we think might be kind of flat. So not as bad as it has been, but difficult to see when we look at the way that this stuff builds across the year. It's difficult when you map that to see how it gets positive. Hope we're wrong, but that's kind of what we're seeing at the minute.
Okay. This actually also is in line with the IMF. So I don't know if you've seen the latest forecast. Every 6 months, the IMF, International Monetary Fund, they produce their economic forecast for the world. And they just published their latest on the 30th of January. And their global forecast for economic growth is around 4% currently for 2023. I think for the UK specifically, it's a bit lower. So, it's not going to be, I think whichever way you look at it, 2023 is going to be another tough year, not particularly great for growth, but it really is around how are we going to trade through tough times and be resilient against a potential recession. So thank you very much, Andy. I'm going to move over to you now, Jim, because I think there's some really big questions around what the operational challenges are going to be, and particularly delivery and returns, but understanding what that means for the final mile. So Andy talked quite a bit about peak. Sorry, let me untangle my hair. And peak, as we know from in terms of operationally, is when there's huge pressure on operations to get parcels delivered on time. In 2022, we saw huge challenges. Last year was huge disruption with the Royal Mail strikes, as well as everything else. Left a lot of retailers stranded and impacted the services from the other carriers, who then had to absorb all this, unexpected volume into their networks. From your perspective, how important is it to build contingency into your delivery, and how can you do that as a retailer?
Yeah, well, first of all, I think there should be a national medal for anybody in logistics who gets through peak. And I have to say, if I look at peak over the last 5 years, every year has got harder, and there's been more challenges. And so, a round of applause for all my fellow logisticians out there who've had to go through it. I think the risks, as we found out this year, were if you go into peak with a single final mile provider, for example. I think what we saw with Royal Mail and some of the other service interruptions and delays that were out there, you can get caught out. And I think one of the things I would encourage everybody to do is to really get some robustness in your delivery solutions, and really look at not having all your eggs in one basket. I would really, the sort of the traditional approach really is around you go out and you talk to another carrier, but therefore you split your volume across, so that impacts your costs. I'm an advocate really of really looking at those providers and partners who can give you multiple multiple sort of delivery options, which will really, it basically means that a flick of a switch, you're into another carrier without having to do the urgent negotiation, and to see whether they've got capacity to deal with your peak volumes. Get all that stuff sorted out in the first half of this year, so you go into 2023 with multiple delivery options.
Yeah, spot on. One of the trends that we've seen coming through very clearly is how the rise of consumer expectations around what they want in terms of delivery choice. And we've already talked about how that has a direct impact on your conversion rates.
Yeah.
Consumers have come to expect, free delivery and free returns and everything in between. But of course, this has a real impact on the bottom line operationally.
Indeed.
Do you see this changing, especially as we go, we look ahead, and the threat, the risk of a recession, uncertainty around consumer spend? Do you think that retailers are going to need to rethink, free delivery, free returns, and what can they be doing to try and bring these costs down?
I can only imagine some of the conversations that are going on at senior level, at board level, within some of the brands, where you've got the e-commerce teams who will be saying, we need to offer free deliveries, free returns. We need to be getting, cheaper costs to help the bottom line and margin. And you'll have the operators in the room going, you're killing me in terms of, the amount of labor it's taking to process returns. And, and you're asking me to reduce cost at a time where, labor costs are going up, and fuel at least has leveled off for the time being, but could go up again. It's a very uncertain world. I think there's a couple of things you could do just straight off the bat. One is, raise the minimum basket level for free delivery, and also look at for your discounted items, in particular your sale items, really look at whether you could do, for example, what like Zara Next have done, which is to really charge for returns, or put a small fee for returns on those items where you are already having a reduced margin in terms of sales. So that, I think there'd be two things straight off the bat I would look at. But it's a real challenge, because I can just, you're in a virtual stage of conflict between the brand, which wants to make more money and make it easier from a top line, but you're responsible for delivering the bottom line as an operator. Mm-hmm. And I think that I think it's going to really call for the two parties to come together to really think about what's best for the brand long term, and make the decisions that way.
Absolutely. And I think certainly when I look to our customers, GFS customers, our retailers like LK Bennett, they are certainly, rethinking their policies around free delivery and returns.
Yeah.
But I think what they're thinking, their approach to it is not to make this, to charge and make a profit on it, but really just to cover the costs, to sort of at least cover the cost, the operational cost of the return.
Yeah. I think for those brands that have got, for like clothing manufacturers, clothing brands, I think, where you've got almost like a philosophy of consumers now who will order one up, one down, and just to see what the fit is. Anything you can do on your website to give the consumer the ability to be able to get the right size in the first place, and that comes down to the technological solutions you can offer in terms of digital sizing, in terms of the magic mirror type arrangements, really might pay dividends in the long run in terms of reducing your return rate.
Absolutely. And now there's no better time than now, really, when consumers themselves appreciate, experience inflation every time they walk into the supermarket, they go to the garage, they understand that things are costing a lot more. And I think now is a really great time when customers are so cost conscious to be rethinking and resetting those expectations. I think there's greater tolerance for it. To make those changes now.
I also think, Bobby, as well, there's a couple of things. There's probably 3 things as well you could do that might help you in terms of, sort of looking at reducing the overall cost of your operation in terms of the operation around B2C. And one of them is, first of all, make sure your warehouse and logistics functions are in the geographies that you're operating in. Before Brexit, we had the situation whereby we were able to use, one single market. We could use one distribution center, one partner to deliver all of the EU, and it was relatively straightforward. Now is not that scenario anymore. And in my last job at Huda, I spent a lot of time repatriating UK warehousing back to the UK to give us the ability to be able to meet the service expectations of consumers. So that's the first thing I would say. The second thing is look at your volumetrics, and this is something that not a lot of organizations I've found have done, but the breaks that you get from your carriers in particular will be based upon volumetric weight, so half a kilo and a half, whatever, for your parcel rates. Really look at the packaging solutions that you're providing, your warehouse are offering in terms of the box size. Make sure that they fit the breaks, right? Because I've seen it in a lot of cases whereby you're shipping, I don't know, a third of a kilo or half a kilo of air because the box size doesn't match the breaks that you've got from the carrier. And you can really, if you get that right and you get your packaging absolutely right to hit the volumetric weight, the volumetric targets, you can really save some cash doing that as well.
Yeah, and also I think look at services provided which is not based on volumetric weights and dimensions, because you can have those services do exist. I mean, we certainly provide those. And I think another area is, one of the toughest things from an operational in terms of cost of delivery that we saw in 2022 was the uncertainty around fuel surcharges. So this was the additional price you'd pay. And in 2022, I think the average fuel surcharge on road transport was about 19% across the year, compared to about 11% in 2021. But then when you look at the average fuel surcharge on air transport, that was almost double. That was on average 38% compared with 19% in 2021. So perhaps looking for services where the fuel surcharge is actually fixed, so at least it's easier to budget, manage your costs. That would also help.
I think unfortunately for 2023 most of those budgets will be fixed now, so if you haven't done that, then but definitely it's something to look forward to at the time where you start to do your reforecasts, probably for the rest of this year in about March time, to look at sort of to fixing that. I think anything you can do to hedge your bets for this year, I think it's very, very uncertain in terms of how it's going to go from a cost perspective. I find myself in a very, very conservative mode in terms of, really looking at how do I make what I've got work better and more efficient, and make sure that I don't get or try and minimize the surprises in my supply chain.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I guess you've got the pressures of cost on one side. On the other side, you've got the pressure in terms of expectations from the consumer, and how do you make them happy with the whole delivery experience, giving them the delivery options they want and making sure they get a consistent experience every time. Andy showed from his analysis that there is certainly a correlation between conversion rates and delivery options. But, what's your view on this? How do you make this a practical reality?
I think a few years ago, we seem to have been talking about click and collect for many, many years now as the third option, free and fast, and then click and collect. I think that really has come into its own. I think with the lockdowns in particular, and people not really knowing whether they're in the office or whether they're going to be with hybrid working, the delivery options now for for B2C are absolutely critical for 2023. So I really encourage all brands out there to start looking at increasing the number. And, you know, as Andy's slide showed, it really can make a massive difference in terms of if you're able to offer more delivery options than the competition, you might just get that conversion to a sale. And I think, you know, it's not just fast, you know, free and lock, you know, click and collect. You know, you need to be looking at lockers. You need to be looking at potentially a green option, you know, environmentally friendly option, you know, using those carriers out there. So again, we go back to who are the partners you're working with, and do you want to do individual integrations with each individual carrier, or do you want to be looking at sort of somebody, an organization that could help you to have one integration, but to give you multiple carriers and probably get you better rates as well. You know, and you know, GFS is a good example of that, and I've got experience of using them, and the options you've got available now are truly amazing. So I'd really encourage you. You know, other multi-carrier options are available, but I really would encourage you to sort of really focus on this as one of the big projects for 2023.
And research shows us that this is, you know, this is true. Not just the research I referenced earlier with IMRG, the home delivery survey. When we look at, if I look at, from our perspective, we think best practice is having at least 6 delivery options at the checkout. So like you mentioned, you've got free should be one of the options.
Yeah.
You've got nominated, right? So that people have got the choice of being able to specify a specific day, a specific time slot that they want something delivered. You've got deferred, where they want it, say, a week later for some reason. You've got click and collect, you've got parcels, you've got lockers, you know, green delivery options. You should have a whole breadth of options, so that the more you have, the greater the probability is that the customer's going to find a delivery option that is convenient for them. And it's like you said earlier, it all goes back to convenience, because that is the whole premise of online shopping.
Yeah, I think it's yeah, as I said, it was a nice to have in previous years. I think for 2023 and beyond, I think you've got to have it. You know, I just don't think the consumers will stand for, if you're up against a competitor who can offer those things, then you will lose out. I think that's, and I think from talking to, you know, some of my colleagues around in the brands at the moment, that is a big project that most of them are working on for this year.
Yeah, but like you said, Jim, it's a given that from a delivery perspective, you need to be able to offer these wide delivery options. But like you also mentioned, the challenge is, how do you do that? You know, how do you do that? And how do you do that in a way that means you can avoid multiple integrations and whatever else, avoid diluting your budget? And that is the real challenge that operationally that people face.
Ultimately, you know, most people who are responsible for logistics within a brand have got, you know, lots of plates spinning, right? And the thought of having to negotiate with individual carriers for one service and to split your volume so that you're not getting buying power from sort of having to deal with individual carriers, I think it would really just go, you know, I haven't got the bandwidth for this. And I found that, you know, there are options out there like GFS where you can do one integration that will give you multiple carrier options, and they'll even build you the APIs onto the back end of your website to make it even easier to integrate. You know, a lot of that technology is already taken care of. You know, you're buying a sort of like an off-the-shelf package, and in most cases, you know, that it's not going to cost you a lot for the integration. I really would encourage, I think for me, look, it's the way forward. And I think most companies now really need to be looking at these solutions where you get one integration with multiple options, because people just, you know, logisticians within the brands just haven't got the bandwidth to and really, should they be doing it, you know, managing all those different suppliers when really it's not adding any value other than the sort of option. But in terms of from a cost perspective, you're losing out. From a time perspective, you're losing out. And I think you can find these partners now that have done it, been there and got the T-shirt. They've done multiple integrations with many big, large and small brands. So I really would encourage people to go down this route. Absolutely.
Now that brings us on to the big finale question, and Andy, I want to bring you back into this as well. I'm going to ask you simply, Andy, you first. So we've gone through, we've had a look back at 2022. We can see what's coming in 2023. From your perspective, Andy, what will it take for online retailers to succeed?
So in the figures that I showed, there's lots of declines, but the thing to bear in mind is that is an average. So yes, overall it's down, but there are retailers in every category who are positive, right? They're actually doing okay. So it is possible, even in a very difficult market, to actually do all right. And there's myriad reasons, of course, why they might have done that. They might have just done really well on their marketing, some very clever campaigns. Maybe they've just got great products, whatever it is. But they've done something that means that they're sort of doing all right. Great if you've done all the donkey work and you've ended up in a position where you're doing that. I think if you're sort of looking at it now, how are you actually going to do that? Well, it might be that every business needs to look at it and say, we really think that even though times are difficult, we must invest in this. We must build this out. We must do that. And that might be the case. And if that's what you think is absolutely sort of mission critical for you, then maybe that's kind of what you do. I think when times get difficult, it does rather hone your focus a little bit. But I think in many cases, and Jim sort of said this earlier on, it might be just making the most of sort of what you've already got, really. And this is what a lot of retailers are saying to me. We'd love to innovate, we'd love to do clever stuff, but really there are some quite small things that you can do just to push the conversion up a little bit, and that sort of stuff can make sort of all the difference at the minute. And I think if you're providing an experience for your customers where they think, I do like that company, I do value that company, ultimately you're going to succeed sort of longer term with that. You sort of go front of mind for them. And there's some crazy things that you can do to push that up. Like I showed earlier, there's the number of delivery options you've got is just one small factor. I know companies that have changed the font in their navigation menu, and it led to more people using the navigation menu. And people, when they use the navigation menu, they tend to convert a little bit higher, right? So it's amazing the testing that you can do, and try and find and isolate things that are going to kind of work for you. It could be that you look at something where you go, we're really rubbish in this area. We really do this bit of the experience quite badly. If we could just push that up a bit, then it's going to help us overall. So I think in a way, what I'm saying is, good retail will probably sort of help you win through. If you're doing what your customers think you're really good for, your products are really good, the way that you present them and get them to people, etc., and all that stuff. If you do that pretty well, if you execute that pretty well, you've got a good chance. It is very booming at the minute, isn't it? But retail is not going to fall over. Some companies won't make it. I think that's probably true. But ultimately, it will survive. And those that position themselves well because they do retail well, should be all right.
Going to be the winners. Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that. What about you, Jim? What do you think from a operations perspective? What do you think it's going to take to win in 2023?
I think there's four things I would work on. One is no surprises. So I would really focus on making sure that you've made your supply chain as robust as possible. We talked about fuel surcharges, we've talked about carrier options, and really get it locked down now. Get those negotiations and get those suppliers and various things in place in the first 6 months of this year to give you time to bed it all in before you go into peak. I think that's important. I think sustainability right? And I know it's a word that gets overused, but I would encourage you to really focus on making sure that your packaging solutions and your final mile is as sustainable as possible. I think that consumers are really waking up to this now, and will actually use it as a condition to buy. Depending upon what you've got. I mean, I just worked on a project to take out 350,000 plastic bags from a B2C customer and move it all over to recyclable material, and there was a 10% uplift. So it can make a massive difference when you go, and it also gives you something to talk about on social media from a positive side about what you're doing for the environment. And I would also then as well, I think, make sure that you've got a plan B, right? So I think with all the solutions we've talked about today, I think having a plan B in your back pocket when you go into peak, I think is going to be very, very important, because who knows, given the challenges, who knows where we were, so you spoke in January, where we'd be in Q4 of last year, here we are at the beginning of February, and who knows what challenges. So I would really encourage people to really have a plan B for that last mile delivery for next peak.
That's wonderful. And I think that's a really good point to sort of bring it together. I'd like to say thank you to you, Andy, and thank you to you as well, Jim, for joining us today. And thank you all too, and look forward to meeting you at our next webinar. However, if you do want to contact or make contact with either Andy or Jim, or myself, you've got our information here, our contact information. So thank you everyone for joining us, and look forward to seeing you again next time.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much. All the best, everyone.